we'll begin because we're all here. To introduce myself, I'm Jonathan Watkins, the director of ICON, and how great to have such a crowd on this, the second day of our Migrant Festival. Strikes me as being particularly appropriate that we should be in such a room, this room of bead drawings by Hew Locke, sitting on your right. When you look closer, you'll see it's a procession. It's a room which depicts constant movement. And Hew's exhibition with such a bead drawing with so many boats inside, there's a constant reference to constant movement. Hew Locke, how much we've enjoyed having your show here, Hew.
Feelings mutual, mate, seriously.
We're going to miss you. And I have to say, the reaction to the exhibition has been so positive and strong. I'm going to flatter you with a few comments that have been made. I mean, I'll start off with the 4-star review in The Guardian, pick of the week in the Financial Times. People have loved it, and this is one very short review from a visitor. Hew Locke exhibition, the best for years. It's great to have you back, and for those of you who are following the program, you'll know that Hew's also speaking tomorrow with curator Hamad Nassar. Now, the other person here on the platform with me is David Lammy, the MP for Tottenham. Best of luck tomorrow. By the way. David's been to ICON before. In fact, I remember sitting outside in our cafe talking about what it was like to be a chorister, and how positive an experience that was for you. As actually, I'm getting a bit personal here, it was for me too. A lot has happened since we met. You were then Minister for the Arts in the Blair government, and now you are arguably one of the most outspoken politicians in this country when it comes to social justice. I mean, there have been so many things about which you've said so many good things. In fact, I have to say, your speech last year about Windrush is perhaps the most electric speech. And such kind of positive things coming out of that, and of course to Grenfell and the work that you've done, as a result of that awful disaster, and the list goes on. There's a quote that I have rustled up here as well. See, I'm so bookish. Member of Parliament David Lammy is a credible voice for the improvement of the human condition, both in Britain and internationally. He's widely respected, and given his talent for working with all groups, David Lammy could well become Britain's first black Prime Minister. So you were, you arrived in politics very, very early. You were 27, I think, when you were first elected, and you followed somebody, Bernie Grant, who was a Guyanese, and this is something that these two men both share, and the reason why they're here together is because they both have Guyanese heritage, but neither of them was born in Guyana. I think Hew was born in Edinburgh, and David, you were born in Whittington Hospital in North London. This is a bit like This Is Your Life, isn't it? I just realised. And we have, the nurse that delivered you is going to come. No, actually, it's not true. But Guyana means a lot to you both. Clearly, Hew, I mean, your exhibition, it comes through very, very strongly. And the way you draw on the tradition, cultural tradition of Guyana is very strong. And David, I know that I think you visit Guyana almost every year. So you both have the idea of Guyana as a home. I mean, it's a home away from home in many ways, and I wanted you both to talk about that, how it was for you. So, Hew, would you like to start? I mean, what does Guyana mean to you, and from this distance?
From this distance, to be honest, it's kind of painful, and I do mean that in a
because I'm not there, I'm here. But when I'm there for too long, it's like, okay, right, I need to get back to London. So but actually, no, that's not strictly true. I'd have to be there for quite a while to sort of feel anything like that. But it's, Guyana is really, okay, it's a friend of mine, right, who said to me, like, he's asked the questions, we talking, a few drinks flowing and stuff like that. And he said, so Hugh, where is home in your soul? And I couldn't give him an answer. He wanted me to say Guyana, right? But I couldn't give him an answer. And I've been thinking about that question ever since. It's been 8 years ago he asked me this question. Guyana is so important to me, so important to me. As I speak now, I'm speaking in a way which everybody can understand, stuff like that. In Guyana, y'all don't understand me at all. You know?
And David, how about you? I mean, you talk very passionately about the food, for example, and taking your children there.
Look, I think that I am and insist on being very proud to be British. And most recently, I've been having this fight with John Cleese about whether I get to be English and from London without having, I don't know what it is, Anglo-Saxon or Celtic DNA. But I guess that both my parents have died. And the house that I grew up in was absolutely a Guyanese West Indian home that would be typical of anyone who can kind of capture that in their mind in the 1970s and 80s. And the way I would put my relationship with Guyana, and I am very privileged and fortunate to have been able to go back to that country every year really since I was about 18. I would say that I am probably at my happiest in the Caribbean. I mean, just in the water. My kids joke that I don't swim when we're on holiday in France or somewhere, but suddenly I bathe when I'm in because the water's so warm. But I guess it's because I can feel my parents and a cultural history. And to be honest, I think if you are in public life and you are a minority in public life, you do need a tremendous amount of reserve and strength and fortitude. And that is found, for me, in the country of my parents' birth. So that's my relationship with Guyana.
Going back to John Cleese, I thought it was really funny that he wants to leave this country and go and live in the Caribbean.
Yes, it's a sort of, yes, there's great irony in him sort of pontificating from Nevis about what London has become. And also, this is the sort of, this gets you into language and deep unfairnesses that are at the heart of so many of these debates, because what he is challenging in relation to London is immigration, which, if you understand Britain's empire history, is outrageous, really. And of course, there he sits in Nevis, probably describing himself as an expat, when he is an immigrant. So there's great irony, there's great unfairness, there's a inability to cope with the truth of history. And my God, that's why we need the artists to present those truths in different ways.
I'm working on it, man, I'm working on it.
Now, there's a remark that you made, I mean, the idea that all these people are coming to Britain, and you said, well, Britain came to visit my parents, and it wasn't as if they asked for that.
Well, the point is this, and it came up very much with Windrush. So let me tell you a little story. I was sitting before I made that speech in the House of Commons, and the House of Commons was getting busier and busier. It really was a full House of Commons for that urgent question. And I had intended to start my speech by talking about my parents. And the way I sum up the Windrush generation is I say that they are people who came to this country and gave so much but took so little. And that really does sum up that generation. And in thinking about that, I was thinking of my father, who came here in 1956, my mother, their commitment, their sacrifice, and their belief in this country. But of course, as I sat there, I realized that I probably shouldn't begin like that, because I wasn't sure I would get through my speech. I would be in tears before the first paragraph was over. So I decided to switch last minute. And I changed the beginning of the speech as I stood up to challenge Amber Rudd. I began with the first ships from Britain arrived in the Caribbean in 1625. And I have to say, Hugh, I was thinking of some of your ships as I said that. And of course, it was important to begin that way because the story of Windrush does not begin in 1948. That is the convenient way that you'll see the BBC summarize the contribution of people from the Caribbean.
And it's an easy thing to have that clip of Kitchener singing in London as a place. It's a very easy thing.
It's very warm and cozy, and it's very and but the story begins in 1625 when Africans were brought to the Caribbean continent, and the reason why it's so outrageous to strip them of their rights, to deport them, to detain them today, is because these are formerly enslaved people. And that must, in any kind of consciousness about dignity and human rights, count for something. That is where the story begins. And that is rightfully, I mean, of course, as I said it, all my colleagues started to look, oh Christ, it started slavery! All feeling terribly guilty. But that's the power, isn't it, of a platform, and I chose to use it in that way.
And the ships, I mean, Hugh, when you walk into Hugh's exhibition, there is a ship that was a vehicle for slavery, and then it was a vehicle against slavery, interestingly.
Yes, this is the USS Constitution, the model right in the next gallery there. And I like that kind of ambiguity, you know. It moved from one thing to something completely different, you know.
It's that idea of sort of movement metaphorically. And then upstairs we have this extraordinary flotilla of ships and their historical boats, their battleships, their refugee rafts. And then at the very front on the right-hand side, there is a ship full of ships, and it's a boat that carries other boats, and one of those little tiny models is in fact Empire Windrush.
Yeah, I mean, I was planning to have a larger Empire Windrush boat in this show, but A, it didn't work out, and B, it didn't feel right. It's almost like it's the needle in the haystack, because it's this little secret, this little problem at the heart of the situation. I mean, this Windrush thing kicks off, and then one of my Facebook friends starts posting stuff, and I'm thinking, wait, you have a problem? Really? I couldn't believe this, you know? I was quite shocked. But for me, it's important that people look for this thing, and it sits there, right? And there's this accusing little boat, basically, you know?
To talk about your parents as well, it would be, I mean, your father was a very eminent artist. They met, actually, I don't know, I mean, I'm asking you a question that I don't know the answer to this question. It's a genuine question. Where did they meet? Did they meet?
They met at art school. These were in Bath. They met at Corsham, fell in love, got married in Guyana, and came back. And I was born when they came back from my dad to do an MA in art at Edinburgh School of Art. You know.
And then you were from the age of 5. You were in Guyana till.
Yeah, from 5 until 21, and to the point point where when you said I wasn't born in Guyana, I was like, what, really? You know? Because I can sometimes, in this context, I can sometimes forget, you know?
And then references to home, because this is something that we were talking previously, and it's, you know, and to have Van Lee Burke in the audience here, making
Definitely.
photographic evidence of this discussion, because it was in this very gallery that we took the entire contents of Van Lee's flat and exhibited them here. And you probably, the question is, so what, you know, how did Van Lee survive? We went to IKEA together, and we bought him some very nice Swedish furniture. But otherwise, I mean, it was the corridor, it was the front room, it was the kitchen, there was your bedroom here, there was your study over there. And, you know, how important it dawned on me because of the visitors and so many stories that arose out of that exhibition. I became so aware of the significance of the front room, you know, and the kind of objects and what was exhibited in that place. And we had people saying, oh yeah, we've got one of those and we've got one of those. And I was going to ask about, you know, a home for those from Guyana. I mean, what is it like? Was it, I mean, what kind of environment was it? Did you have a front room in that good old Caribbean way?
Well, so I think that it's, this is such a wonderful question. It's quite a big question. It's quite a big question because I've got to answer it just briefly in two ways. There's home in Guyana, and home in Guyana is like a lot of countries that are tropical. For a start, everyone leaves their shoes at the door. You wouldn't walk into someone's place with your shoes on because you might be bringing in insects and things. Home in Guyana is a place usually where you can smell food. Curries and roti and chow mein and pepper pot around and about. Home is most often, in a Guyanese sense, also a place where there are many children running. I've got a strong feeling of that when any village, any part of Guyana. But what I would say is home in a Guyanese or Caribbean sense or West Indian sense, for those that migrated to London, they're bringing home with them, but they're bringing things that they're moving away from. You know, I remember my mother, I've just written about this in this book that I'm writing that's going to come out in autumn. She would put, you know, in Guyana you've got to worry about the flies. So every piece of food you're putting something over, those plastic rings. And when I grew up with all these rings everywhere around the flies, and of course it took about, you know, it took a few decades for my mum to realise you probably didn't need to do that so much in the winters in the UK. You know, some of those foods and smells turn into Sunday roasts and things. But of course there's music playing. There is all sorts of Guyanese phrases, sayings, cusses that you're hearing. That is a sensibility that people have brought with them. But as is the way with the people of the Americas and those islands and Latin America and South America, we are in the end. There's a hybridity to us. There is a flexibility to us because we are made up of so many peoples. I did a DNA test not so long ago and found out that I have Scottish blood in me. Now we know where that was from. So what I mean is that we're people who actually are also able to you have traditions, but they move and flex and bend. That's the nature in a way of being from that region.
You also said you had Indian eyebrows.
I do have Indian eyebrows. My great grandmother, my mother's grandmother was from Calcutta, and of course, part of our tradition is the huge contribution of indentured workers. So you can see my Indian eyebrows.
I've got a list of questions here, but I'm aware of the fact that it's now 7:15, and this could be like question time. You know, I mean, we needn't have started on the stage at all. I mean, I'm sure the audience is full of questions, and there are so many of you. I mean, things that were occurring to me. I mean, we're in an art exhibition, and we're with an eminent politician, and of course, the question of, you know, difference that art can make politically is something that occurs to me, and maybe something that we could talk about. And also interesting too, in the light of your role as Minister for Culture, David, at the time when you know, we were still probably talking about cool Britannia and the idea of art somehow reflecting or being a vehicle for national cultural identity. And I mean, Hew, I mean, as you know, as an artist from a place, you know, to what extent you feel, you know, responsible for representation of that place.
I try not to get into that too much, but at the same time, I do feel that I am at a distance representing Guyana, but really I'm representing myself. But that cool Britannia thing, I have to say, back in those days, in the mid to late 90s, when that was all kicking off, I thought, well, this doesn't fit with me. And not just that, it didn't fit with friends of mine who had, say, a background with both British and from Ghana, and a number of us, and we thought, this doesn't quite fit with us. And because we were, whatever I did, people said, I like that boy. What festival have you made this for? Oh, have you been to Haiti? Oh, so basically they thought my work was I was a folk artist, you know. So I stopped making work in color for 4 years, and I covered my work in export signs because people thought my work was from somewhere else. We live in a more sophisticated world these days, but that's the 90s. That's not late 90s. That's not so long ago. That was a bit of a. So on one hand, there was very cool Britannia, but on the other hand, if you had this dual heritage thing going on, it could be problematic.
Okay, well, you know, if you don't have any questions, I've got lots more up my sleeve. You can tell, but I think now it's only right that we give way to the floor, and we have a roving microphone, and there's a hand up over there, and I will try to be as fair as I possibly can.
Hello. I think everyone guessed I was going to ask the first question. It was really interesting and fantastic to hear from both of you, and this is also my favourite show in the Icon for about 10 years, I think. I wanted to kind of talk about, as a migrant, and there's a lot of us in the room, which is great to see, because you don't always get that in art spaces, is how do we kind of get past the negativity of the hostile, I mean, I could really go on about the hostile environment, as most of us could, for forever. What do you think we can do creatively and politically to have a new narrative on multiple kind of narratives around ethnicity and diversity? So the questions that you just said, Hew, about the kind of questions you're getting asked about your work in the 90s sound very tired, but I would probably say there are people of colour in this room that still hear that about their work.
Yes, I know about this. I mean, and for me, I've been talking to some younger artists and younger artists of color and various diverse backgrounds, and being quite surprised. I thought we dealt with that nonsense in the 80s and 90s, maybe the early 2000s or the latest. But I was like, why is this still happening? Why is this lack of understanding there still? I think all you can do is, God, it sounds so lame, do the work, you know, just ignore everybody. I mean, I had to do that. And give me a call. I mean, just, I feel, my wife's sitting in the front saying, oh God, I got to deal with all this. sorry, Andrea, sorry. But it's, I mean, the reason I got involved in this diaspora pavilion in Venice was because you get to a certain age and you feel there's a need to give back something, you know what I mean? To start trying to guide people. God, it sounds so terrible. Try to guide people a bit, you know what I mean? It's just like, so people don't feel so alone, you know, because I'm repeating myself now, but I've been quite shocked to hear some young artists saying, well, actually, people don't understand what I'm doing. It's like, well, what you're doing is not that difficult to decipher, you know. Let's have a conversation, you know, and let's try and promote this stuff, you know.
So the idea of mentorship was very important with the Diaspora Pavilion.
That was the basis
and that people
of it.
could, you know, that young ones coming up could see themselves in that.
Yes, exactly,
kind of place.
exactly, and that was very, very, very important, you know.
David.
I think that we've got some profound challenges, and there's no point pretending that we haven't. We've got some deep untruths that have become truths. We've got areas of profound ignorance. We've got populists and charlatans. So we've got a lot of problems here. And so you just have to keep speaking truth to power. Understanding that we are talking here about quite a lot of power. I mean, you know, I hear narratives like, oh, you know, thank God Britain's beginning to have this conversation about immigration that it's not had. What? I have never fought a general election in the last 20 years and not had immigration. Do you remember that campaign that Michael Howard ran back in 2000? Are you thinking what we're thinking?
Yeah, never forgot that campaign. Never forgot that.
You can think of some of the posters going back in time. You know, I'm talking about the Enoch Powell eras. If you want for a neighbour, vote Labour. You know, this has been a perennial discussion. And at the heart of it, here is this great country of tremendous engineering strength, military strength, built amazing ships to get across the world, also through that engineering dug out tremendous and great canals, a sort of the lungs, if you like, of the country, could bring spices and sugar and cotton and all those things back, get it through those canals, through the country, made a lot of money. And yet it has a population, because also during that time you had workhouses, you had working class men and women exploited. There is a kind of ignorance about what went on in that empire. There is an ignorance that the empire made this contribution, and quite understandably these people would come home. When people question the right of Windrush, it's important. They were British subjects, and they were subjects because you made them subjects. And of course, there's so much. I mean, even on the Brexit question, it's come up. I've raised it. It's really interesting. So many people do not even understand the colonial history of this country and its relationship with Ireland. Never mind further afield. So there are some deep, deep, uncomfortable truths at the heart of this discussion. And one can only hope that the crisis that we're in, and that may go on for some time, finally opens up a genuine conversation and dialogue about these things. And at the heart of it is the idea of human dignity. And in the end, we share far more as people than the differences that we have culturally.
One thing I should quickly say is that cultural difference, as a young artist from some sort of diverse background, that's the strength. That is what you got going for you. That's the difference is the plus, basically, quite fun, and a massive plus too. I mean, that's what I've been working with for decades. Oh God, decades.
Okay, question over there. There's a question over there, James, against the wall. Okay. There's a hand up.
I had my hand up for a while.
And then over there, and then.
Okay. Rebecca Hemmings from the National Criminal Justice Arts Alliance. So I've been working for this organisation for the last year, and one of the reasons I went for the job is because of the Lammy review. It was very, it was just, I felt a sense of hope. When I first started the job, there was 40% BAME young people who were in the criminal justice system, and that's now risen within the last year to almost 50%. So it's quite frustrating knowing these figures, and that part of what my job is to do is to help people within the arts to decrease the level of young people who are reoffending or offending in the first place. So I just wondered if you could, David, and yourself, Hugh, as well, just comment on what more do you think artists can be doing to create a greater impact in this area so that less people are offending in the first place, particularly with young people, and also reoffending?
Okay, we'll answer that question now, and then we'll pick up maybe 3 or 4 afterwards, as David suggests. So, what can we do as far as criminal justice?
Well, thank you very much for mentioning my review. This was never ever going to be an easy issue. All countries jail their minorities. If we were in Australia, we'd be talking about the Aboriginal people, where there's probably the worst problem in the world. I don't have to tell this audience about the prison industrial complex in the United States. Save to say there are actually more black men in prison over here per capita than there are in the United States. And you trotted off a figure there that we really need to hang in the room. It's too serious not to. It was such an important thing to understand for this audience, which is that we have managed in the UK to reduce the amount of young people in prison and young offenders institutions. But at the same time, the proportion of black and ethnic minorities we have struggled with. And as we sit here, 51% of young people and young offenders come from a black or minority ethnic background. So these are profound and difficult issues. Now, it's all there in my review. It is for the government to implement my review. They are getting on with parts of it, but struggling with other areas. They remain in dialogue with me. There's a lot that artists can do, lots. There's lots of amazing work already going on, of course, in prisons. We do need some reform in prisons so that governors, all governors, recognize the therapeutic contribution that arts can make, and that we continue to improve education in our prisons. But I guess that there's another real issue here, which is a much bigger subject, which is that there are still too many minority communities somehow excluded and outside wider art and culture. And I meet too many young people that are being fed one particular diet of a certain kind of music and a certain kind of expression of the black urban experience. And actually, in an age of Spotify and social media, where we all can exist in our echo chambers, that can be very, very destructive to your sense of self. When I was growing up, I was exposed to everything. Yes, of course, calypso, soca, reggae, but also country, folk, choral, classical. And so there's a narrowing going on. And so how does the arts open up that and challenge some of that narrowing, particularly for urban young people of all colours? And that's not just in relation, obviously I'm talking about music. Music was my thing. But right across a range of genres and art forms, it's what is possible. And in the end, what I love about an artist, when an artist has cracked it, really cracked it, and what you see on these walls is someone at the height of their powers, is that ability to bring what is often a vulnerability but it's basically a truth. Hugh is speaking his truth. knows himself, knows his truth, has a sort of confidence, at least artistically, to bring to an audience, and we respond to it and we think, wow, this knocks me out. And what we want is to give those young people that confidence. How can they speak their truth? And that's the power, it seems to me, of the arts.
Well, I suppose as you're talking, I'm just thinking of the friends I know, close friends, who say, oh, I work in a prison. I was like, oh, I didn't know that, you know. And then another one say, oh, yeah. And so I got a number of friends who are working with within the prison system, with ex-offenders, and doing quite good work, actually, you know, sort of, because giving people something which they're not getting on a daily basis in what is a kind of grim situation, basically. You know, I'm not going to romanticize what they're doing, but these guys are doing some good, you know, and there are more people like that out there.
I was thinking it's a shame that Barbara Walker's not here, because, of course, this is such an important subject for her as a mother of young black boys. And I also want to put in a word for our learning team, actually, because we are currently in the middle of an artist residency at Grendon Prison. You know, we've just had 3 years with Edmund Clark, and now we're embarking on another 3 years. And it's thanks to the Marie-Louise von Wojciechowski Trust that we're able to carry out this work. It's such a sort of great extra dimension as far as our learning activity is concerned. Okay, now I think David's advice is really good. So if we could have maybe three or four questions and observations, and then we'll respond to them as a whole.
Hello, my name is John Clawton, and I spent my teenage years watching 3 Guyanese cricketers playing at Edgbaston, Lance Gibbs, Rowan Canai, and Alvin Kalituran. So the influence of Guyana has been massive in this city, if that alone. From that, I ended up being a head teacher, and my son is a teacher in Birmingham as well. And you talked about the danger of ignorance, and also the danger of people only having very narrow narratives in their lives. And you talk obviously about art, but I'm most concerned about education, because if people are ignorant about, you know, what are we teaching in the history curriculum in this city, for example? Why is it not a curriculum about the extraordinary history of Birmingham as well as the extraordinary history of migration? I just finished your ideas about the power of education as well as arts in trying to develop the understanding which you clearly think is so significant.
Great. Another one? There's one over here and one back there, James.
Hi guys, yeah, thanks for coming and talking today. Nice to see you both in person. I've got a lot of respect for you both, your views, your work. So the question that I wanted to bring here, which I've kind of changed my mind on that now, but I'll kind of rush over it, would probably be quite easy for David to answer because he probably gets asked it quite a lot. He spoke a lot about empires and framing things in terms of colonialism, and even spoke about untruths becoming truths. And what about the neo-colonial agenda, such as the Iraq War, which you voted for and against the investigation of? But let's just not even talk about that now. What I did want to talk about was how both of you are kind of creating conversations, which I think are really important. But at the same time, I mean, although I don't agree with this, people would describe kind of some of David's speeches as divisive or race baiting. And I mean, I guess you could be critical of the work in this space because is this really accessible to the majority of people who are really affected by these issues? So I guess, I don't know, just wanted to make those points, and I guess it's going to be bunched in with a bunch of other stuff, so yeah, hopefully you can respond to that somehow. Thank you.
Okay, and there's a question at the back.
Hi. Thinking about my time being the only black child in my school, the only black dancer at the Birmingham Royal Ballet when I was, and worrying about that, and it gave me all kinds of layers that I'm still dealing with, but I'm fine. talking about how that was your power and your difference, what advice would you give to your younger self?
Okay, so there are 3 observations, questions.
Advice to younger self? Was that? I missed that last bit.
Advice to your younger self.
What advice would you give to your younger self?
Don't panic. Seriously, I do mean that. Do what you really want to do. Do what you really, really believe in, even if it's personal. And if you really believe in it, it's not always a guarantee that. Then hopefully somebody will come along and go, actually, that's okay, you know. But you got to do what you really believe in. Okay, confession time. Back in the day, right, which wasn't that long ago, I decided, you know what, I need to sell some work. So I foolishly decided to make a body of work to sell. It didn't work, you know. You got to be. Jeez, I shouldn't have said this in this context. Anyway, but you got to be honest with yourself. You know what I mean? You got to do what you really, really believe in, and all you can do is hope that other people believe in it as well. But then the thing is, you got to go out and hustle. You can't just sit down. I've done this great thing in my studio. Dying on work, man, you know, that's 50% of the job. The other 50% is going out and telling other people, actually, you know what, I got this great thing in the studio, come and check it out, you know. It's a lot of work. But if you love what you're doing, then it works out, you know what I mean? I would imagine the same thing for you doing. You work very, very hard, but if you hated it completely, you would, let's not go there.
But, yeah, education.
So I just want to take the young man's questions first. Over a 20-year career, there are ups and downs. And it's quite important because you raised the Iraq War. You also raised race baiting. To really think quite hard about the power and the strength of David Lammy in the system, and there aren't many of me, to affect change. As I sit here today, approaching 50, but looking a lot younger, I am at the height of my powers. I've been at this game a long time. I know how to affect change, and if you go back to 2003 and that period, I don't think anybody would suggest that the young David Lammy, who had been in Parliament barely 3 years at the point of that crisis, was in a powerful position to affect or change anything. But what I did listen to very closely were the Kurdish people in my community. I have the largest Kurdish population in the country, who had a particular view about Saddam Hussein at the time. But clearly, much went on that was horrendously wrong, and has caused pain, suffering, and death in that country, and I recognize the importance of that. You mentioned also race baiting. This has become fashionable, to challenge people that raise issues of race. It's deeply uncivilized in a civilized democracy to be that wicked and small about people in public life that by definition must stand up for minorities, because the real test of a mature democracy is how it treats minorities. How does it treat ethnic minorities? How does it treat, or has it treated historically, LGBTQ people, people with disabilities, women who aren't a minority, but just in the end could be forced into that position. And the story, the big story of the 20th century, is that so many of us in this room, I suspect, either from a working class background, issues of sexuality, disability, or ethnicity and race were able in that century to self-actualize, to dream that you could be something and actually be it. That is the story of the 20th century. And I'm afraid, because that is the story of the 20th century, there are people in the 21st century that want to roll it back. Because when they say that David Lammy's race baiting because he's pointing out a truth about a minority, your truth has been the dominant truth, which is, of course, no offense, a white, male, upper middle class, privileged truth has been the global truth. And there's no room for anything else. And as a Labour politician standing up for working class men and women of whatever colour, but also standing up for minorities of whatever background, but also in solidarity with those of LGBTQ or with disabilities, I'm absolutely clear that more politicians need to be doing this, not less, in these very, very scary times. And just to the question on education, I mean, you said it all. I mean, it is so important, and there's so much still to do. There has been progress, but it is patchy. And, you know, I go to all sorts of schools, and there are schools where parents pay $30,000 a year for them to go, and they turn out like Boris Johnson and Jacobs Rees-Mogg. And there's a lot to do there. And there are schools, the average secondary school in this country, where students are funded to the tune of about $6,500 a year, I suspect, here in Birmingham, and with a little bit more resources, but also with some real scrutiny about what is in the curriculum. I'm not sure, by the way, that those issues should be left to Secretaries of State. Michael Gove did a lot of damage when he got his hands onto the curriculum. I really don't think it should be for politicians to come and go with their whims as to what should be in the curriculum. I mean, he got rid of things like To Kill a Mockingbird. I mean, why would you do that? Maya Angelou. I mean, why would you do that? Anyway, so lots to do in education as well.
Hugh, any thoughts on education? Your education?
Guyanese education is pretty good. It can be better. I think it's suffered in recent years, but it can be a lot better. But I mean, I grew up in a country which had a 90-something% literary rate. When I came here, I expected everybody here to be bright, and there was a surprise to realize that wasn't quite the case. You know, also a surprise to realize that people didn't know where the hell I came from. I know where you guys come. where, you know, like anyway. But anyway, that was a long time ago. It's good having you here to take the flak on the education question.
Our cricket friend did not name check Clive Lloyd.
Yes.
Put him on the record.
Yeah.
You're going to be in sport, John.
I mean, education.
So we'll have another round of questions and then wrap it up. But a chance of obviously for people to speak to Hugh and David, and actually the exhibition will be available for you to see as well. So, Moorhaz, you've had a go, so I think this one here.
Thank you. Hello, I just wanted to make a statement that I'm Guyanese and very, very proud of being Guyanese. And it's so lovely to hear two beautiful men talking about Guyana in such a soulful, loving way, because most people have no idea where Guyana is, do they? They think we're Ghanaian, and it's very frustrating, isn't it, sometimes to have to explain your heritage and your roots. And people want to other people, so people of colour in the crowd, as well as not colour, but from other. We constantly have to kind of contextualise ourselves before people take us seriously. So I just wanted to give a big
lovely, warm love to both of you as being Guyanese people, and big up the West Coast, that's what I say.
And then here, James.
Hi, I think it would be remiss of me not to mention Brexit. And in the context of today's conversation, you see the invisibility of minorities within the discussion when so much of race and immigration figures. So it would be nice to just have some of your thoughts on that as well.
Okay, the piece upstairs is not called, the piece upstairs is called Armada, and it's specifically talking about that. But in a wider sense of the word, in a historical sense, not just about that, but the title is titled to pinpoint that because it can be read in different ways. Armada is the Spanish, Portuguese name for a fleet, so it can be the Chilean Armada, it can be the Peruvian Armada, but then when you title it Armada here, people think, Spanish Armada, invasion, they're coming for us, they're coming for our stuff, you know what I mean? So that's what that's about. And you can't make, for me, I can't make work right now in this context without that somewhere at the back of my mind. But I don't want it to dominate and swamp and kill me. Your job is to deal with the whole thing, you know? But for me, I can sort of deal with it in a slightly askance way, because I'm interested in the whole migration thing as a historical thing. You know what I mean? I mean, when I talk about, say, for example, American stuff, right? There was a time when people there was Vietnamese boat people. Now there's Vietnamese Americans. You know, that's just a normal thing. I mean, I think, and I always like talking about migration as a long thing. You know, this is not just people that didn't arrive yesterday, or they arrived for a particular reason. We're over here because you're over there, kind of thing. You know.
Actually, we'll ask David to respond to that, and then the last question over there, James. But yes, Brexit, Icon's tied its colours to the mast. We have Wolfgang Tillmans' work downstairs in our reception, and, you know, we, like you, are Remain.
Look, I think that on a day-to-day basis, I think everyone in this room probably knows my position because I'm pretty out there and vocal with that position. But I genuinely think we have to think quite hard about how we come back together as a country. It feels like one side or the other's going to win, but I fret a lot about how we bring our country back together again. I fret a lot about what has been unleashed. I worry. I know all the actors because I know all of the politicians that on every single side of this debate. And I do worry about a group of politicians who've been very well educated at some of Britain's best schools, who have led a discussion around Brexit, and I think have promised something that's not deliverable. Because the people they've wound up at some point will realize this. And I also worry about the nastiness, about what feels to me like a hard right, far right position that's entering, that was always there. Anyone who's an ethnic minority knows it was there, but it feels like it's moving from the fringe into the mainstream. I worry and fret a lot about that, and I guess as a minority I can feel it quicker than some others, because they'll probably, if they're coming for anybody, they'll come for me first, right? Because I've been at the forefront of this. So I, through self-interest alone, I want to see it dealt with. So I think that this is a time where we need to hear minority voices. And the wonderful thing about Windrush was it was one of those moments where the majority saw a minority community and thought, we know those people. What do you mean they're treating them like that? Why? And it sort of entered into the mainstream for a period. And so it's really important to hear those voices and to be present in the discussion. It's why also I say to those who have led the Remain campaign before and some people who are running People's Vote, this cannot be something dictated by a few frankly, Waitrose shoppers in London. It has to be a grassroots thing where you're hearing voices that are not often in the mainstream at the heart of that campaign, and I think that's still got to be cracked. I just want to thank you for bringing Guyana back into the room. Yeah. And I just want to, because it makes me feel good, and it's a Friday night. I'm hoping that they're going to give me some alcohol before I leave, but I don't know. The hospitality in Birmingham is usually great. But Guyana, this country of many waters, which people do not understand, these amazing, vast rivers that feel like the size of oceans, this country of lush rainforest, this country the size of the UK where everyone lives along the coast, and the rest of the country, you can be in the middle of Guyana. It's like being in Birmingham, and for the breadth of the country, there's hardly anybody. It's an amazing, amazing, amazing place. And it really is a place, a tectonic, where people come from South India, from Africa, from China, from Portugal, and have settled. Small place, but an interesting place, and a place that those of you who haven't heard a lot about Guyana are going to hear a lot more about, because it's also a place that's just discovered oil.
A lot of oil, like serious oil, you know what I mean? But yeah, Guyana is, I want to be there right now, quite frankly, you know what I mean? Guyana is just a unique, special place, you know? The only, go on, please.
I was going to say, there's one more question at the corner there, and I sort of hope that you'll carry on in this loving vein.
Well, I was going to ask a question, but David has already sort of trod all over that. But so I shall make a statement, really, because from my own perspective, I'm a little bit older than you, and I'm not as good-looking as you, apparently. I am very proud to be black and British. And when I was growing up, it was very difficult to talk about being black and British, because unless you were African or you were West Indian, you could tick that box, but black British didn't exist at that time. It was very difficult to assimilate into that identity or project that identity, but it's now become real. I'm proud of that, but on the flip side, I have profound difficulties with this country today through austerity, Brexit, all the hideousness that's come across and pushed into the mainstream, the hatred of basically a country that's quite isolated in its identity. And I fear for the future, but at the same time, really the thing I want to push out to you and everybody else in the room is hope. What is the hope? Because I think that's what we want to cling on to, using the metaphor of your boats in a sense. That's really what I'd like to latch on to.
Thank you. Thank you for being Martin Luther King and ending with the hope. What is the hope? Look, the hope is the young people. Remember that whether you're talking about Trump or whether you're talking about Brexit, in the end, this is largely something driven by baby boomers, not all baby boomers, but a certain generation who are about to select the next prime minister, by the way, but anyway, a certain generation who have managed to live quite long and still have the reins of power, actually, in terms of pensions, houses, mortgages, a home, all those sorts of things. But I have huge faith in the millennials. I really, really do. They are exciting. They are the children of the baby boomers. I'm Gen Xer, little small generation, and we sort of look both ways. But I have real confidence in the millennials. They excite me. I think they get a lot of the issues that have come up tonight, broadly speaking. I think they're socially plugged in and globally plugged in, but care about the local, and you can see that in things like the climate change fight that they're currently leading. So that is the hope. We will get through this period, but the baby boomers have to let go a bit. And what this represents is a kind of last gasp clinging on for a certain kind of power that clearly is shifting away and will shift away, and a new opening up will happen. And as one Tory said to me, an old-time Tory, one of those middle-of-the-road Tories, been in Parliament a long time, he said to me, "It's difficult, David." He actually said it in a very posh voice. He said, "David, it's really quite difficult. But I tell you what, if the 60s was great, in this century it's going to be even better." So we will get there, but it's just going to take a little while.
Hew, a last word?
I was just thinking about all the assistants I work with from time to time. They're all, young, and I'm always like, so what do you guys think? All right, so that's where you guys are coming from. Oh, and because in between work, I don't crack the whip, to me. So people, the conversations do happen in the studio, and that's always fascinating to me. So, so this is what you guys are doing. This is what you guys are looking at. All right, so, and seeing something new being created, a new generation creating themselves, like, all right, and that gives me a lot of hope. You know what I mean? A lot of hope, man. Seriously.
Well, it was a great privilege to have your studio team here, I have to say. Great privilege to have had the installation and to have had the exhibition. It's, and it's so good that, you could join us on the last days of what has been an excellent exhibition, but also Vanley Burke's was very good as well. And that was within the last 10 years, Lara, I have to remind you. It remains for me to say thanks to you, an audience that's been so attentive and has asked such sort of good questions. And I would like you to join me to express your appreciation of our panelists tonight, Hew Locke and David Lammy.